My name is David Brown. This is the first video I've recorded in a while, and I'm have usually talked about movies, toys. Uh, Sometimes I've covered shows or at least things on TV. This time I'll be doing a reading of one of my own stories, and it's using a character who is still my avatar for this channel. He's called No Hands the Evil Possum. So this was a character I created a very long time ago. Uh, Looking back, I can see reacting to problems I'd had at the time, and it's something I've continued to think about the character through what I've gone through. And with this story, about 4 years ago, I just wrote out this one story for this character that was very short. Not only that, the chapters were very short. And that, looking back, I was expressing a lot of the frustrations I'd gone through, and I could still come back to it and deal with that. So for me, the main thing with this character, I was a few years after I'd come up with the character, diagnosed in the autism spectrum, and I think this and one or two other characters made me really connect what I was told to what I was like all along. And so I've used this character as an avatar during self-advocacy, uh, which is something I've been involved in. Sometimes I have ended up burning bridges. So with the character, it's set in really a post-apocalyptic thing, and the odd thing is, it was a series idea I'd had for a long time before that, and it wasn't originally supposed to be post-apocalyptic. It was just I had ideas for a civilization of intelligent rodents and other creatures. I would be the first one to tell you, not only is a possum not a rodent, we are closer to the rodents than the rodents are to possums. Uh, I worked them in, and the real reason I did move away from having humans was just that I had so much depth in the world that I didn't really need humans to be there. So what I really came up with was the idea that the humans just left. Uh, and what I know now is that that was something that had been its own subgenre. They have talked about this in a video on overly sarcastic productions. One thing they didn't cover, probably the very first example of this genre, was in 1939, a film called Peace on Earth, which I directly reference in this story. And my idea all along was just that the animals would not be able to understand anything humans had done. I had the idea of them being able to copy human guns and cars and things on their scale, but it's still not something where they're really on the human level. And with the possum, my whole idea was that he can always beat the rodents because the rodents still think like rodents and not like him. And with the character, he was a mercenary. I never had the idea of him being evil or even amoral as we would see it, which was really part of the point of the series. He just will take any fight, even if he probably won't get paid at all. And that is figured in several different story ideas I've had for this character. And with this story then moving I'm going to go ahead and move forward. It's supposed to be set early in his career, and he is already supposed to be a legend, and that was something else that was a major part of my whole body of work. I've always liked the idea of assumed mythology, like things that even in the world of the story are myths, not in the sense that they aren't true or necessarily untrue, but that they're ideas, they're part of a tradition, uh, enough that it might, for the purpose of the story, it wouldn't matter if it was true or false. And part of my idea about a mythology was to have uh, other creatures like him who existed at some point, but nobody remembers them except in legend. So one of my ideas was having a giant colossus on the rodent scale of one of the possums, and nobody knows what it is or what it represents. It's just like a myth where the or mythological character where the original myth was forgotten. And this is something I had done. It's the Evil Possum with this car. Obviously, it's based on a VW. The thing about that is that it was supposed to be based on a VW prototype, which had no rear windshield, and it made sense for the possum just in that there would be people trying to get at him from behind. And the other thing, he does have one hand missing, the other is there. And the name was always supposed to be more like a boast, like he doesn't even need his hand to fight. And really, he was always supposed to be kind of a cyborg, but maybe steampunk, diesel punk cyborg. Uh, and part of that is that in all the other stories, he does have a mechanical hand. It's just not figured here. And here's another picture from the story, getting into the story. Uh, and this was just a funny drawing. I did crop it a bit for my purposes. Part of that really with the artists I was working with. Their names are Nicosa and Carlos Miguel Garcia. Uh, I didn't really go over all the details of what he would look like, so I was cropping for that. And this, one thing is that I felt like this really captured how big the character is supposed to be. My original scale was that the rodents were 6 inches and the possum was 8 inches. I scaled that up for the more recent stories, so the possum is 18 inches tall, which is still huge. And when he's holding this, it's one of the baby rodents, and it's not even supposed to be a real baby. If you really had that, they'd just be the freaky pink things with the eyes still shut, more like the rodent equivalent of a toddler. But this this really is how small it would look next to the possum. And I have a few more drawings here. This The thing about this, it's for the finale of the story. What it was really going to be was something graphic, which I don't really do. So I just told my artist, do this without that, and I'll tell you to go back and put a little more in. We never went back. And this is one more I had done, following up with the baby. rodent. Wanted a just kind of cute image to end it with. And the thing about this is that my idea was that the rodent would be using one of the coins that the possum was going to be paid with as a teething ring. So that covers the artwork and the background. One more thing I'll say. When I wrote out this story, I started every chapter with a paragraph in present tense that is usually actually a flashback. And this does include, as I'm going to read it, a prologue I wrote. So I'm heading on in. The scene could be timeless except for the shape of the participants. Four figures crouch around a table, peering intently at the cards in their hands and the crudely stamped coins on the table. Their whiskers gleam in the sunlight and their tails twitch behind them. The cards are quite large, bigger than paperback novels in proportion to their clawed hands, and the printing is all black. After a moment, one of them squeaks in triumph. He reveals his hand to the other players, briefly silencing their chittering. But then, as he leans in to scoop up the pot, a card pops out of his vest. Teeth and eyes flash. In a moment, the table is upended and the other patrons are engulfed in the brawl. When the door opens, the rest turn on the newcomer as a matter of instinct. It took just a few busy moments for the newcomer to reach the counter, where a pair of the more grizzled patrons still sat on their bar stools. The others mostly lay sprawled about the saloon floor. Two had departed through the windows. Another had exited through the door without opening it in the process. The bartender looked up almost calmly at the figure before him. The newcomer stood a third again his height, topped by saucer-like ears and a slick-back mane that did not quite conceal a very high forehead. His right arm ended in a hook. The other was thickly muscled. The bartender was calm enough to further note that his clothes were made from the hides and pelts of creatures larger even than himself. "I'm looking for a town called Ningonapate," the newcomer said. "Is there anyone here who can give me directions?" It was one of the patrons at the bar who spoke up first. "Say, I know who you are," he said. "I heard you were halfway across the Oldlands. They say you're one of a kind, maybe the only one that ever was." He started to rise, but his companion restrained him. The bartender spoke up. "No, that's not right," he said, nose twitching. "There were others, once." Only then did he address the newcomer. "I know who you are, what you are, too. I'll help you any way I can." "Very well," the newcomer said. "Then tell me, is there a town called Ningunaparte? And if there is, how do I get there?" It was the second patron who spoke. "'Tisn't no town," he said, "but there's a place by that name not too far off. If you follow the road that brought you here, if you came from the north and not the east, you'll find an abandoned road. Go east on that, all the way to hell and gone, you'll find a way to Ningunaparte." The bartender nodded. "That's right as far as I know. I've never been that way myself, but I've served people who were going there. Some of them came back." That was when the first patron did rise. "See, there's something I can't help thinking," he said as he rounded the corner of the bar. "They say you're the only one of your kind. And then they say nobody ever beat you. So it seems to me whoever takes you down is number one for all time." The next moment the newcomer lowered a booted foot. The patron had departed, leaving a hole in the wall behind him. The newcomer surveyed the other patrons. "Leave," he said. It took bare moments for them all to comply or haul away those who couldn't. He turned wearily to the bartender. His hook sank abruptly into the countertop. How often do you open a bottle of poison in the presence of your guests? The bartender backed away. Then, belatedly, he held up a very small bottle. It's insurance, he said, same as you have, only if you wouldn't leave. His eyes darted to the revolver at the newcomer's hip. Fair enough, the newcomer said. Have you used it before? I opened it once before, the bartender said. For Long John Raider. I suppose you know about him. Then you'll know why I didn't have to use it. The newcomer nodded. Show me, he said. The bartender put a stopper in the bottle and handed it over. It would not have harmed me, he said, then amended. Not in a quantity I could not taste. He set it on the counter. I will go now, the newcomer said. I suggest you return to the north. This place does not suit you. Within a day, the bar would be sold for a tidy profit. For the remainder of his career, everyone would say the bartender was the most fearless of all in his line of work. The only time anyone asked, he just said that he had drawn on the unconquered king. And the questioner never came to his establishment again. And this is part one. I will be saying the parts. The land can be called a desert, but it is, if anything, even more barren. It lies between a range of low mountains and a plateau in the medium distance, all the same deep yet dull red. In between is a mainly level lowland, heavily crisscrossed by river channels, deeper ravines, and any number of outcroppings, with an occasional oddly angled column of rock rising like a non-Euclidean obelisk of an alien god king. Throughout, the bare rock boasts more vegetation than the bleached and sandy soil, mostly cacti and thorny shrubs with an occasional skeletal tree. Yet here and there, for those who might look with care, animal life reveals itself. A scuttling scorpion, a darting lizard, a brazen snake, a furtive quail, and overhead a drifting vulture. Through the midst of the waste ran what could be called a road, if only because it ran uphill too often to be a purely natural feature. Only one traveler was to be seen, following the slender ribbon of hard-packed dirt and the nearly perfect likeness of a VW Beetle, about 2/3 of a meter long, made to look like the first of its kind, without a rear windshield. Barely a puff of dust was left behind as it swung back and forth on a tightly wound uphill path to a lesser tableland. Ahead lay a cluster of crudely built adobe houses that could just qualify as a town, built on the right scale for creatures a little over a foot tall. As the beetle approached the settlement, an obstacle suddenly blocked the way. A gigantic piece of cactus ribbing laid with clearly considerable effort. The car's mass and oversized tires could have allowed it to roll over the obstacle, but the driver chose tact and backed up to a building he had just passed, a haphazard wood structure that looked more like an outhouse than a functional habitation. As the vehicle pulled to a stop, the driver finally emerged, a creature 18 inches tall but proportioned like an 8-foot linebacker, with a massively muscled left arm and a hook in place of a right hand. A mane of dark fur bristled on a high forehead, and the lips peeled back in a short, tapered snout, revealing savage teeth that a biologist would have recognized as akin to a possum. And indeed, the creature was not unlike a possum, to the same degree that a man is not unlike a monkey. As the creature approached, a curtain rustled behind a slit of a window. I am called No Hands, El Diablo sin mano derecho, the unconquered king, he called out in a nasal but the commanding voice. He opened a coat of alligator hide, revealing an array of weapons and a snakeskin vest beneath. I am a great warrior, and I have come from far away because it was told the people of this place have asked for my help against a dangerous foe that none have seen and lived. I will fight for those whose need is great enough to pay my price. a tenth of your wealth, however great or small." As he spoke, his hand slipped toward a 4mm revolver holstered inside his vest. He eased back at the sound of a door opening and closing at the rear of the building. He circled around and found a small pot of indifferently stamped silver coins, with a yellowed, rolled-up chart on top. He glanced at the chart and shook his head. "If I am to aid you, I must have information," he said impatiently. "The reports that reached me spoke of 3 found killed by an unknown man or beast, and many more who vanished without a trace in the wastes. It is said that a child is among the missing. I need to speak to at least one who can show me the places where the dead were found, and the known or likely routes of those who did not return." He made a pointed glance down at the pot of silver. "And I do not collect payment before my work is done." After a moment of silence there was a rustle of movement, and something was tossed through the half-open window. No hands caught it in mid-air. It proved to be a dog-eared journal, tied shut with twine, with many notes, drawings, and additional charts sticking out. It was clear from the encrusted dirt that it had been buried and dug up again. "I see," he said. His lips peeled back, but he made no sound as he went back to his car. The creature in the doorway is unmistakably a possum, complete with the long tail and triangular snout of its kind. But this one walks upright and wields a rifle. It shows no concern at several smaller bodies on the floor, but locks on another creature in the deeper darkness. The possum raises the rifle and loads around, but eases when it sees that the watcher looking back has only one arm chained behind its back. It barks a command and tenses again at the returning stare. It fires almost instinctively, but the figure has already dived to one side. There is a double click, and the possum briefly gapes at the sight of a lever-action rifle gripped in the 2 dexterous feet of the first specimen of Archaeodelphis invicta to appear in 100 years. No Hands, also known as the demon without a right hand, or to the learned by the species name Archaeodelphis invicta, parsed the handwritten script with his hook as he read aloud. "I am satisfied that the quarry we track lives on the upper plateau," he read in his nasal drawl. "It lies in the midst of a harsher land than even the wastes around it. However, it must have been more hospitable in former times, as several brave and honorable explorers affirm the report that certain ruins of the Great Ones stand on the highest plateau. Even now it is not too inhospitable for the bold and well-prepared to approach. Indeed, young men from the nearer settlements enter with some regularity, believing a tale to dissuade my own partner to fancy that some great treasure must lie in the waste, though it is self-evident that the handful of mines much closer at hand can barely provide for the livelihood of its inhabitants." He finished, "I bury this journal in the event that neither I nor my partner return, so that others may follow. But I have no doubt I am close to my quarry's lair, and if I strike soon I may surprise the creature. Then I will see what he or it, or perhaps she, may be." No snapped the journal shut with a hiss. "He looked in the wrong place," he said. His lips peeled back in something like a sneer or silent snarl as he examined the jumble of charts and hand-drawn maps laid before him on the back of a long-abandoned mining truck. He rose to his feet and stared out at what the maps represented, a desolate and treacherous wasteland that led to the foot of a great plateau. He glanced once more at a particularly inscrutable note, whose most legible content was a single boldly scrawled word, Maru, meaningless except as the name of a land hundreds of miles distant, albeit on the far side of the mountains that bordered the same waste. Finally, he turned back to the largest chart, an official topographical map that already bore a dozen hand-drawn corrections. His expression softened as he traced the path of the journal's vanished author backwards. He was on the right path, but he took the wrong turning, early enough to end up further off, he murmured. He would have figured it out, and perhaps he did before the end. But by then he would have become the quarry. He traced the channel between two divergent fissures with a red crayon on the point of a hook that replaced his right hand. His preparations were finished in moments. He holstered or slung his weapons, chiefly a broom-handle pistol, a long-barreled carbine of the same design, and two shotguns, one pump-action and one double. Then he approached the haphazardly boarded-up entrance of a mine. He pried away the boards to reveal an object covered by a sheet. He paused to consider a note pinned on the canvas. "My debt is repaid. Go to your own fate. J. Rader." He pulled back the cover, revealing a second vehicle. It was the Bug, not unlike the beetle he had driven to the camp, except with an open top and wheels and shocks so large that the original wheel wells had been carved away. Within half an hour, the vehicle was cruising the rocky waste, kicking up more gravel and rocks than dust behind him. The off-road Bug's tires and shocks allowed the vehicle to run right over many obstacles, but there were many times he had to turn aside, particularly for the many strange rock columns that dotted the landscape. They were often 5 or even 10 meters high, colossal next to Noan's 46-centimeter height. He might have favored a mining truck for its sheer mass, except that he repeatedly had to wind through narrow gaps and passages, some so narrow that even the Bug's stripped-down body scraped the walls. It took 2 hours and the better part of a third before he reached the foot of the plateau. He slowed as he approached the opening of the passage the ill-fated hunter had marked. He rolled back the top and stood up. He surveyed the terrain carefully. After a few moments, he called out, "If you are a creature of reason, you know who I am, and you know why I am here," he said. "I was summoned by those who fear you, but I have accepted no payment. Leave this place, and I will not follow. If need be, I will tell those who sent me that I found you already dead. They will believe me." For a moment his words continued to echo, but no answer came, nor had he expected one. With a settlement in a day's reach even here, there could be no other place for such a dangerous and solitary creature to go. He gave a low growl and started the Bug's engine. As he began to roll forward, he glanced behind just as a tremendous roar resounded. What he beheld was one of the largest of the great columns toppling straight for the mouth of the fissure. He braked and swerved and almost simultaneously threw open the door. As he poised to leap, he looked back and snatched for the great chart and a few scraps of paper bundled with it. This time there was ample dust, which took some time to clear. Even through the murk, it was plain that the passage was choked with rock. As the dust settled, a gleam became visible, which resolved itself into the shape of the Bug, its front and cab crushed by a boulder as big as the car. Beside it was Nohan, seemingly intact and perhaps even unharmed, with the chart still in his single hand. But as the cloud fully dissipated, it was plain that something was wrong, and anyone looking from the right angle would have immediately seen the reason. The lower part of his right leg was still inside the car, hopelessly pinned among the twisted metal. And this is chapter 3. The view was from the midst of a great forest, looking forward to an even greater mountain range. Among the foothills and cliffs lie dwellings of adobe and unmortared stone, long since fallen to ruin. Towering over them all is a colossus carved directly from the mountainside, easily 10 meters tall and far greater in proportion to the dwelling around it, portraying a greatly stylized figure seated on a throne. Its face and visible teeth suggest something like a possum, with a short snout and high brow that suggests the development of intellect. The throne it sits on is made entirely from the skulls of a kind of large rodent, all carved at a scale roughly life size. It is the Colossus of Far Meru, and the lore of the marginally sentient creatures dwelling in the forest tells that the purposefully defaced inscription beneath the figure's feet once read, "The Unconquered King." Noans blinked at the sight of the drawing before his face as his consciousness returned. He had kept it with him since he had copied it from a scroll 500 years old in the greatest library of an empire across a great sea. It had been plain at a glance that it portrayed a member of his kind. A greatly corrupted copy of the same image, coupled with a few bones, had led a learned being to describe his species a half-century before he himself had been found at a place called Jonesville, among the bodies of 39 common Didelphus sapiens and 100 rodent townfolk. Archididelphus invicta, or unconquered king of the possums. Now he stuffed it hastily into his vest and looked to the problem at hand. His leg, that was more than trouble enough, pinned inside a vehicle that was itself pinned and crushed under a great boulder. He was lucky enough to have been hit by only the one. Many more tons of rock littered the landscape around him, all but blocking the path of the unseen killer he had followed to this place. Then again he might have escaped wholly unscathed if he had not used a crucial moment to grab a sheaf of papers that included the drawing and an error-prone topographical map of the plateau and the surrounding wastes. He felt frustration, but nothing like regret. An hostile environment against a plainly deadly foe. It remained to be seen what would bring him victory. He had not yet conceded that other outcomes were possible. As for the immediate problem, that was no problem at all, provided one admitted the only solution. With a hook that replaced his right hand, he slashed through the strap of a pump shotgun, now caught in the wreckage, regaining mobility for his left arm and upper body. He then unscrewed two bolts that held the hook in place. In its place, he affixed a stout forward-sweeping blade. Using his left foot as well as the single hand, he tightened his belt around his knee. Bare moments later, a roar sounded through the channels and canyons of the plateau. A space between two boulders a dozen meters away gave shelter enough for Noans to finish the work. The trail of blood was sure to be followed, but he was confident that he would be on his way before that. A double-barreled shotgun he had carried with him was the best he had to work with, along with a saw recovered from a toolbox mounted on the back of the crushed bug. He had to saw off most of the stock and a good part of the barrel. The belt gave a length of rope, lesser length of rope was enough to put what remained in place, while his cast-off left boot proved adequate to shield the muzzle and mechanism in case it was needed for its original purpose. Almost as an afterthought, he tied more rope around his waist in place of the belt and ran a length of twine down to the trigger. The approaching figure was all but silent, yet still cautious. The trail had been too clear for pursuit not to be expected. The improvised iron sight of the crossbow lined up with the space beneath two great boulders, only to be lowered again. In the near distance, the sound could still be heard of a single clopping boot and a lighter unshod foot retreating up a narrow path up the rocky face to the plateau above. And that's where I'm going to end this video, or this part of it.